are joined by several of our endorsed candidates who were victorious on Tuesday. And we're also fortunate to have Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia's political director, Han Jones, who will break down Planned Parenthood Virginia PAC's investment in these critical races and share some information about our volunteer program that knocked on thousands of doors across the Commonwealth. We are thrilled that our endorsed candidates have won majorities in both the state Senate and the House of Delegates. As of this morning, 21 of our endorsed candidates won their elections to the state Senate, and 51 of our endorsed candidates have won election to the House of Delegates. We know there's still one House of Delegates race that is too close to call, House District 82. And we are thrilled that with these majorities, that means that there is a pro-abortion rights majority in Virginia's General Assembly starting in January. And this election proved that when abortion rights are on the ballot, reproductive freedom wins. Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia endorsed candidates unapologetically made abortion a central issue, and voters responded with a clear message. They do not want an abortion ban in Virginia. We heard over and over again at the doors, and we saw in polling, that Virginians want abortion rights protected. We are excited that with these majorities, we can start the process of advancing a constitutional amendment that will protect abortion rights for decades to come. Whereas supporters in other states can collect thousands of signatures and get on the ballot within a year, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's a longer process. Both bodies of the General Assembly must pass the constitutional amendment twice with an intervening House of Delegates election. Our victory on Tuesday allows us to work with these majorities to advance a constitutional amendment that will be on Virginia's ballot in 2026 when we keep a pro-reproductive rights majority in 2025. I want to also talk about what we saw from anti-abortion politicians this cycle and say voters were not fooled by the GOP's attempt to rebrand their extreme anti-abortion agenda or distracted by their disingenuous tactics. Anti-abortion candidates tried everything to win. We saw candidates scrub their websites of their anti-abortion views. We saw them only express their true desires to ban abortion when caught on undercover videos. And we also saw them send deceitful mailers denying their plans. But voters saw through their lies and rejected their anti-abortion agenda. And I want to be clear about what this victory really means. This is a critical victory for healthcare access and the future of abortion rights in our Commonwealth. Virginia will continue to be a key access state and the only state in the South that hasn't banned or restricted abortion since Roe v. Wade was overturned. This victory will allow patients from Virginia and across the South to access the healthcare they need and that they deserve. From the South through the Midwest, we know that these abortion bans, in effect, are hurting patients, providers, and their communities. This is especially true for Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other people of color who disproportionately feel the effects of abortion bans and restrictions as a result of this country's legacy of racism and discrimination. When you add the possibility of having low incomes, lacking access to reliable transportation, and being under or uninsured, the challenges compound, making abortion difficult and often impossible to access. Many patients are forced to travel to less restrictive states at great financial and emotional cost to themselves and their families. That was what was on the line, and that's why we are so grateful that Virginians rejected an abortion ban and expressed support for protecting reproductive freedom. I also want to acknowledge that our political and advocacy work wasn't just the last 3 months. Our path to these pro-reproductive rights majorities started nearly a year ago when we made the rare decision to endorse in a Democratic primary. If our next speaker hadn't stepped up to challenge an incumbent state senator, we may have been in a position with a 2020 tie on reproductive rights. And that is why I am so grateful that she has joined us here this morning. And now I would like to turn it over to the senator-elect for Senate District 13, Lashreese Aird.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you so much to the entire Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia organization. As we reflect on Tuesday, which was just a few short hours ago, I've had an opportunity to think about the importance of abortion rights to elections here in Virginia, in Virginia's voters. Quite frankly, this may have been an off year for elections in Virginia, but not when it comes to the rights of voters, namely the constitutional right to an abortion. And when the Supreme Court overturned the constitutional right to an abortion, and this governor declared that he would aim to pass a 15-week abortion ban in Virginia, despite us, as you just heard Jamie say, us being the only safe haven in the entire Southeast, he took our voters for granted. Now, as Jamie mentioned, having Planned Parenthood involved in my race for almost 18 months, because I ran both in the primary and in the general, also in a district that easily mirrors that of Virginia with rural, urban, and suburban voters, and winning both of those elections overwhelmingly, I can unequivocally say that Virginians, and particularly Senate District 13, they stand firmly for access to an abortion. While extremist Republicans spent time trying to paint Democrats this entire election cycle as out of touch, the real problem is that they fail to understand that access to an abortion and reproductive freedom is bigger than just that issue alone. It literally is the central healthcare decision that can determine the trajectory of someone's life and that of their family's life. It affects every other issue that they care about as voters: housing, economic security, education, criminal safety in your community, and so much more. And furthermore, at a time in Virginia where we continue to have high rates of infant and maternal mortality among Black and Brown communities, I really don't think Republicans understood just how much voters were going to turn out and care about this issue being on the ballot. And so I am someone who was told that you can't run on abortion, you can't win on abortion, especially in Black and Brown districts. And I am proof that not only do they care about it, but they will stand firmly and fight back when that is the issue on the ballot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Senator-elect Aird, and we are so excited that you're going to be there to serve us in the state Senate. My name's Han Jones. I am the political director with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia and Planned Parenthood Virginia PAC. We have been incredibly proud to contribute to the victories of the amazing electeds that are on this call with us today and the progress that their election is going to mean for Virginia. It was immediately clear to us that abortion was going to be a critical issue in these elections. We saw the outpouring of support for reproductive rights after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and how that led into the 2022 elections, where overwhelmingly we saw that people voted in favor of abortion rights and in favor of pro-reproductive rights champions. This was further reaffirmed as we saw more and more polling across Virginia about the support for abortion rights, and the polling from campaigns that showed that this was an issue that people deeply cared about as they were going into the ballot box. And as Jamie mentioned, we started this work in 2022 to start working towards the majorities that we would need in order to advance reproductive health care protections. We worked on a special election effort for Senator Aaron Rouse in what was Senate District 7 in Virginia Beach at the time. And we spent roughly $100,000 in that race on direct mail, digital ads, and staff support for press events, canvassing, and phone banking. In Senator-elect Aird's race in the primary in Senate District 13, we ran a strong campaign against the only anti-abortion Democrat in the legislature for our champion, spending over $120,000 on direct mail and digital ads, as well as, again, press events, canvassing, and phone banking, reaching out to voters directly. And we started all of that over 7 months before that primary. This work that we did made it possible for us to be in the position we are in now. Planned Parenthood Virginia PAC also co-sponsored polling with Vote Pro Choice this cycle, and we saw how important Planned Parenthood is as a messenger. Planned Parenthood had a +17 trust differential, showing that voters overwhelmingly trusted us. That outperformed any politician or political group. We also had a +16 trust differential with independents, showing that we were going to be an incredibly important messenger on abortion in this election. Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia endorsed 108 candidates for the General Assembly. We wanted to make sure we were marking the candidates that were going to support and protect rights for voters so that they knew who they could trust. We invested over $900,000 in 9 House of Delegate seats and invested nearly $1 million in state Senate races in 6 critical districts. Approximately $870,000 towards those elections went towards the election of the new legislators that are joining this call today. We made sure that the message was being heard loud and clear. Abortion was on the ballot. We did paid door knocking operations in Western Henrico and Virginia Beach. We sent out 22 direct mail pieces, laying out opponent stances and making clear our endorsed candidates are champions. We ran 16 different digital programs that reached nearly 10 million impressions. We engaged 450 volunteers to knock on doors, make phone calls. They completed over 800 shifts over the course of this election, starting in July. And volunteers knocked over 12,000 doors during that time and joined us for 11 highly impactful phone banks where they made tens of thousands of phone calls. We are incredibly proud to have been part of these efforts, and we are so excited to work with these new legislators to ensure reproductive healthcare access is protected. And with that, I am so excited to introduce Senator-elect Van Valkenburg, who is an absolute champion. We were so excited to see him get elected. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Han, and thank you everybody for being on the call. My name is Skylar Van Valkenburg, I think a lot of you on the call know that as a civics teacher and as a 3-term delegate, one of the things that's been most important to me, and one of the things that I think is most important for a state legislature in general, is to foster a healthy democracy and to ensure that all people can participate in that. And one of the core things that comes with a healthy democracy is individual bodily autonomy and freedom and liberty. And that was what was on the line this election, and is one of the main reasons that I got into this race a year ago, when we saw how important this seat was going to be and how important Western Henrico was going to be to ensuring that Virginia could move forward on a whole host of issues, but also to ensure that Virginia could remain a place that respected women's bodily autonomy, that respected freedom, that respected liberty, and that's what was on the line this election. In an abstract way, right, but in a very personal way too, with someone with 2 daughters and somebody who sees how important it is to our community every day, and that was felt throughout this race on the campaign cycle. I mean, people were bringing it up constantly. I think Han can talk about it on her end with their efforts knocking on doors in Henrico, but it was top of mind. And interestingly, since the election's been over, I'm hearing from even more people at the grocery store, at work, in my neighborhood, of people kind of audibly breathing a sigh of relief that their freedom were upheld, and thanking us for upholding their freedom, because this is an incredibly personal issue and it's an incredibly important issue. And we knew all along that Republicans, when they were prioritizing abortion bans, which started with the governor, my opponent launched her campaign with an ad about it. They continued to communicate on it through the fall. We knew that was incredibly unpopular in our community. We knew that it was a losing issue, that's not what people wanted, and I think the election results showed that. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that on the one hand, you had Democratic candidates in the House and the Senate that were talking about these core issues that are fundamental to who people are: their bodily autonomy, their ability to read the books they want to read, their ability to be safe from gun violence. And meanwhile, our opponents were messaging on semantics, trying to tell people that a ban is not a ban, and trying to tell them that what they intuitively understood was wrong. And I think with the former speaker's comments just yesterday insisting that that's still the case, I think Republicans are going to continue to lose elections if they go down that path, because we know that a far majority of people in Henrico and a far majority of people in Virginia and across the country, if you look at Ohio, Kentucky, these other states, don't want politicians in the doctor's office. They don't want politicians telling people what they can and cannot do with their bodies arbitrarily with made up numbers, with made up, arbitrary restrictions. And so I'm really proud of all the work we've all done to ensure that here in Virginia, we're not going to go the way of a lot of these other southern states. And I'm hopeful that moving forward, we can be constructive and we can put these protections in the Constitution because that's where they belong. It does not belong in the legislative body. So thank you, everybody, for being on the call.
Thank you so much, Delegate and Senator-elect Van Valkenburg. Now excited to shift over to talk about the House of Delegates. And I would like to now pass it to Delegate-elect Michael Fagans.
Hey, everybody. I just want to, as many of the candidates and electeds are on this call, we're extremely tired, but extremely excited and fortunate that we've done what's happened. It's that we've secured the Senate and we flipped the House of Delegates. And PPAV was so instrumental in so many of our races, but especially mine. I was running against one of the most anti-choice candidates in the House of Delegates. And especially here in Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach is a very purple city. It's going to continue to be a purple city with the large amounts of military that we have here in terms of active duty, veterans, those that are connected with the military. There's a large amount of independence here. When we launched this race 19 months ago, we knew that was going to take talking to the voters day in, day out to really understand the issues. And so surprising to many that, especially after the Dobbs decision, that individuals of all walks of life that identified in many different ways, that the top issue really was reproductive freedom here in Virginia. We heard that everywhere from the most western part of Virginia Beach to the very border of Oceana, where the naval station is, and everywhere in between. And as someone who served for 20 years in the Air Force in healthcare administration, I served, taking care of patients both in deployed environments and here in home station. And I've been in many providers' offices and labor delivery rooms when tough choices had to be made. And once I explained to many voters that my background and how important healthcare is, and that it wasn't just policy for me, it was something I'd seen day in and day out, taking care of patients, saving lives, being a part of the patient improvement process, that those decisions need to be made between a patient and a provider. And the voters, resoundingly in our district spoke out and stated, yes, that they believe that they do not want reproductive restrictions happening here, that abortion is healthcare. And especially when we are running up against somebody who, fundamentally based her career on restricting those rights. And we saw it in the post-election interviews where the local news stations were asking, why was reproductive freedom one of the top issues? And they stated, that they wanted, their children to have the same rights that they had, and as others have stated, that we knew that Virginia needed to be that bastion here in the South, because we were hearing about patients having to travel, and it really did make the difference in terms of the investment that Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia did in our race. The digital, the grassroots events, the canvassing, the mailers, it made the difference. And it showed, when you're flipping a district, and we were hoping, of course, for 1%, but now it looks like, it's going to be about 8% now. And so I think the voters spoke out resoundingly on Tuesday that they wanted to make sure that reproductive freedom stayed here in Virginia, and that that we focus on other issues at hand, and especially sending a strong message to my opponent that those type of restrictions on their bodily autonomy are not asked here. So I want to thank everybody who phone banked. We heard at the very last minute we had voters coming out saying they got calls from phone banks, and I had one voter come out to me and state that that they had planned on sitting on the sideline, but they saw a digital ad and they really didn't realize what was at stake and it was a digital ad for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia, talking about, what is going to happen if the Republicans were able to flip the Senate and keep the House. What will happen on Wednesday? So I want to thank everybody so much for what we did. It was a historic night for us being able to flip the House of Delegates and keep the Senate and send a strong signal, not just to the Commonwealth, but to the rest of the nation, along with what happened in Ohio as well. So thank everybody so much for your support.
Thank you so much, Delegate-elect Fagans. Now it is my pleasure to introduce another delegate-elect that we were proud to support, Delegate-elect Josh Thomas.
Hey, good morning. First, thank you so much to PPAV for all of the support, the phone banking, showing up in District 21, which I think most people in Virginia now know is in Western Prince William County. After the competitive nature of the district, we were for the entire cycle listed as the most competitive district in Northern Virginia. And I think we saw last night that we were able to exceed perhaps the 1% margin we anticipated and win by almost 3 points, due in large part to the message we've been talking about today, which is reproductive freedom. I started this campaign 19 months ago, largely on an economic message because folks were hurting up here in Northern Virginia with the cost of living. But then the Dobbs decision was decided shortly thereafter and fundamentally changed the nature and the priorities of a lot of the folks that live up here in this fringe of the Northern Virginia region. And I have to tell you that most people learned in short order my opponent's views, whether he liked it or not, as he was the gentleman caught on 2 separate recordings during 2 separate months with 2 separate audiences advocating for a 100% ban on abortion care. And of course, that was forwarded to the Washington Post. And what I always like to highlight to people is, yes, we have those recordings. Yes, we've heard the recordings. But I think it was lost on some folks, certainly not on voters, but on certainly some pundits that didn't talk about it. If you look back at the article and what he was said when confronted with these recordings, is not backing down from this position, but in fact doubling down on the position and explaining away, well, I don't think we would get consensus on my view, and so we would go with the governor's view. But I think voters are smart enough to understand the definition of the word consensus is that you're taking very different views and melding them together to achieve a different result. That means that he still has that view. And I think that we learned and that voters do not want anyone with those extreme views in their legislature representing them. And I think his resounding defeat by more than 1 point at 2-3 points is evidence of that. I'll tell you a quick story. When that story broke, we happened to be knocking doors in what is perhaps one of the reddest precincts in the district. It's up on a mountain. And I think some folks were surprised to learn that while up on the mountain, the car almost didn't make it on some streets, so we had to hike it. When you get to those doors, a lot of people that live in some rural areas kind of have a libertarian streak, and so when you tell them, hey, this is exactly in my opponent's own words what his views on abortion care are, people were repulsed. Longtime voting Republicans were repulsed by the idea that the government would be standing between them and their doctor on the care that they desperately need. And so the message of reproductive freedom resonated in the 21st district. I think it's a large factor in our victory. And I think Republicans would do well to analyze and reevaluate what their position on this is going to be, because it's very clear that in swing districts and in districts all across the Commonwealth, that reproductive freedom is something that voters prioritize, and it's something that they expect their government to deliver. So again, I just want to say thank you so much to Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia for your support. It made a difference. Pink shirts were everywhere in the 21st district, and we wouldn't be here without y'all's support. So thank you so much, and happy to turn it back over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Delegate-elect Thomas. I think we have a couple minutes for questions if folks want to raise their hand, if there's anything that they want to ask before we conclude. Okay, Okay. I think I saw Jake first.
Hey guys, sorry I tuned in a little late, so this might have been addressed already, but what efforts do you guys plan to make towards a constitutional amendment maybe on this issue? What are some of the obstacles maybe that you see in the way of that moving forward?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. I did address it briefly. So a constitutional amendment is a long process in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It has to pass the House and Senate in identical forms twice with an intervening House of Delegates election. That is something we absolutely plan on pursuing. We're excited about a constitutional amendment to protect reproductive freedom. We look forward to working with legislators to craft that language and for that to be, introduced and debated during the 2025 legislative session. We look forward to ensuring that there is a pro-reproductive rights majority in the House of Delegates after the 2025 election. And we look forward to that same amendment passing during the 2026 General Assembly session and going to voters and being on the ballot in November of 2026. I think, anytime you work on a constitutional amendment, it's challenging. Making sure you have the right language that is going to protect the right, and then making sure that voters know about that plan as well. So we look forward to having lots of discussions all around the Commonwealth, to working with our supportive legislators and starting that process and making it a reality, so that our rights are not a political football, and we don't have to debate whether people are going to have access to safe legal abortion, every single legislative session. And I think I saw Margaret second.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm curious, since 2026 sounds like that's the target date for or kind of timeline for a constitutional amendment. I'm just curious to hear kind of what the early thinking is on the strategy for how to keep political momentum going through then. I mean, that's a full 3 years from now. So I'm just curious about how you sort of keep this issue top of mind for voters, and
I'm happy to take that one. That's something we've already been thinking quite a lot about. So we know that over the course of the next 2 years, right now, the constitutional amendment, because it's such a long process, because it's not collecting signatures like so many other states have, it's a little bit hard for voters sometimes to wrap their heads around. So one of the things we're going to be doing at Planned Parenthood Advocates of Virginia over the course of the next year and a half or so, before we ramp up for the 2025 elections, will be going into communities, making sure that people understand what the constitutional amendment would do and why it's so important. Having a kind of grassroots conversation with supporters. We know that there hasn't been, since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, there has not been a ballot measure on abortion that has gone in an anti-abortion direction. We know that there is a hunger for this. We know that from all the polling we've seen, that Virginians are overwhelmingly supportive of reproductive health care access and abortion rights. So a lot of it is just making sure that people understand what their steps are, and that their next step is actually not to just vote on it when it's on the ballot. Their next step is to re-elect some of the delegates that we have here today, re-elect pro-reproductive rights champions, and oust more anti-abortion delegates, so we can be sure that in 2025 we do have the majorities again to vote for that language, so that they can see it on a ballot, so that they can vote for it directly. And we are incredibly confident that when Virginians do have an opportunity to directly vote on whether or not they want their rights protected, that they will resoundingly vote yes.
Thanks, Han. Sarah?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I understand that the proposed amendment's a long process and the language will be discussed and debated, but does Planned Parenthood have a view now about what the right approach is? For instance, is it something that codifies Roe, goes further, addresses other forms of reproductive health care? What's the thinking at this hour?
Yeah, I think our priority is to work with supportive legislators, talk to grassroots supporters, also have legal conversations with the lawyers. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I know that I will not be the one, sitting down and drafting the language, but making sure that we're bringing together all the stakeholders to protect rights in Virginia, so that we're not in a situation where, so many years from now, a different legislature with a anti-abortion governor can just strip us of our rights. I think we might have time for one more. I think I just see Graham.
Yeah, my question is pretty similar to what Sarah just asked. There already has been an amendment introduced with some initial language. Is that the starting point for what you all want to do going forward, or is there going to be like a back to the drawing board process since you kind of moved from it being an aspirational goal to something that can actually pass?
Yes, I think, we are figuring that out, looking at what was introduced by now Congresswoman McClellan and Delegate Herring, looking at that language. But again, talking to lawyers, talking to legislators, talking to grassroots supporters, we want to make sure that what ends up going through the legislature and getting on the ballot is something that will protect the rights of Virginians for years to come. I think that was the hands that I saw, and I know we've kept some busy people for a long time. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today, and please reach out to Ray, who sent the advisory, if you have any additional questions.